Well, on to another issue now. The US President Joe Biden says he would consider personal sanctions on Vladimir Putin if Russia invades Ukraine. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has said the UK is willing to put boots on the ground to support any effort by NATO if Russia invades Ukraine. Well, joining me now is Sam Armstrong, the Director of Communications at the Henry Jackson Society. Welcome to the programme, Sam. Can we expect any more developments from Russia this week?
Well, Russia really only has one thing it can do further, which is to invade or, as Liz Truss might coin it, launch an incursion into Ukraine. We might see some sabotage attempts launched at Ukraine, conducted locally, but really the ball is now in Ukraine's court, and we're seeing just how powerless some of what the West's position has left us, where we're waiting for them to act.
It's interesting. There are a number of people who talk about this build-up of troops, who talk about the strategy that Vladimir Putin is pursuing, saying that he may not actually want to invade Ukraine at all, that this might all just be a grand bluff, a bargaining chip, trying to extract concessions from the West without a drop of blood being spilt. How weighty would you put those allegations?
Well, look, Putin's actions show that the troops on the ground, at least, believe that they are preparing for war. This has been an enormously expensive exercise from Russia, and if it is a bluff, it is a well-executed bluff, and we can't act as if it is. Otherwise, we're only going to leave the door wide open. But look, you're right to drill down onto the risk to Putin of blood. That will be what ultimately puts Vladimir Putin off. The idea that Ukraine might end up being like Afghanistan was for the Soviet Union, ruinously expensive, and seeing a long line of Russian bodies coming back home to deeply saddened Russian mothers. Now, the weapons that the UK have sent, these are anti-armour weapons, anti-tank weapons, are exactly the kind of weapons that Ukraine will need to inflict those kind of losses. They are only useful against Russian tanks, but they are deadly to them.
It's interesting listening to the words of the Foreign Secretary, to the sort of narrative that's being put forward by the United Kingdom, talking about how this would not be a short, sharp war. This would be a long, protracted struggle that the people of Ukraine are willing to fight and the West is willing to fund. Does Russia believe them?
Russia doesn't believe them yet, that's clear. They're still preparing for an invasion, but there's a few more things we can do to drill home the point. The first is we've provided weapons for the Ukrainians to fight back against Russian tanks. We also have Stinger anti-aircraft missiles that could be used to against Russian fighter jets and indeed against their helicopters. Those would scare Russia very much. We could provide up-to-date satellite information from our spy satellites. And we could train their special forces to make this very, very, very painful indeed for the Russian army. Those are the sorts of things that are going to put Putin off. Ultimately, sanctions against him, or indeed the Russian people, matter little. Putin has proven many, many times he does not care about the wealth, health or satisfaction of the Russian people. It is only about playing the grand games of state that he feels he was born to do.
Right. Interestingly, if we look back to 2014, the last time Russia took a bite out of Ukraine and the sanctions that followed, actually, Vladimir Putin's approval rating went up within Russia. The sort of Russia versus the world attitude, the fact that people were talking about Russia as if it were somehow a great power, seemed to do well for Putin. So potentially sanctions could be counterproductive.
Yeah, look, there are sanctions that hit the Russian people that don't seem to work. What you've got to remember, of course, is Russia is a land in which its people have all been far poorer in the past than they are now. So they're not going to hit, in historical terms, that much. There are sanctions that can work. Putin is propped up by a gang of conniving kleptocrats that have ripped off the Russian people in order to buy themselves super yachts, homes in Chelsea, and a globe-trotting lifestyle. Now, Putin is beholden to these people. So in a sense, sanctions that finally stopped London being a playground for these sorts of folks might be effective. In many ways, the King's Road in Chelsea is as much of a front line for this conflict, as is Donetsk.
Well, fascinating, and no doubt there'll be more developments on this front in the days and weeks. We'll keep our ears close to the ground on it. But for now, Sam Armstrong of the Henry Jackson Society, thank you for joining us on The Briefing this morning.